I have to tell you, minding my own business, and then I hear, really all of a sudden for me, well, Greg Abbott's backing Article 5 Convention of States. He's laying out a whole case. What caused you? I mean, you've been a judge and so forth, so you see what's going on to states in the country. What caused you to become such a strong advocate of this?
Mark, it was one thing, and that is in my role as Attorney General of Texas, I filed 31 lawsuits against the Obama administration because the Obama administration repeatedly violated the United States Constitution. But actually it was worse than that, Mark. They turned the Constitution on its head. And I realized it's going to take more than lawsuits to fix what is broken in Washington, D.C. I also realized that it really wasn't just the Obama administration. We see the Supreme Court rewriting Obamacare, rewriting the United States Constitution. And we see Congress seeking us $19 trillion into debt. So we have all three branches of government that are trampling the Constitution. But our founders knew that we would come to this point, which is exactly why they inserted Article 5 into the Constitution.
Now, let me ask you this. Louisiana became the 8th state, I think it was earlier this week.
My neighbor.
Your neighbor, to support a resolution. Any action in now, obviously, the governor doesn't have a role other than, the cheerlead and press it. But any action in the state legislature in Texas?
There is. Understand this. We are not in session right now. In Texas, we do not go back into session until January. In the last session, the Texas House passed it. We were caught up in some other things like tax cuts and border security, and we didn't get it passed out of the Senate. But there's great movement already on it right now. We just had our Texas Republican Party convention where they voted out their top 5 priority issues they want the Republican Party to focus on in the upcoming session. One of those 5 is the Convention of States that got 80% support by those attending the Republican Party convention. By the way, that is the largest state party convention in all of the U.S.
There's really no other way, fundamentally, is there, Governor?
Well, especially considering the times. The times are that the Constitution has been broken for so long. You know, because you're a scholar and you wrote a book about this yourself, you know that the pathway was already broken before FDR, but it was during the era of FDR, during the time period of when FDR tried to pack the court, that the Supreme Court went off the rails, and they refused to follow the strictures of the Constitution. And so for now, 80 full years, there have been violations stacked on top of violations of the Constitution where all three branches of government are straight. Then when you couple that with the fact that we have the vacancy in the Scalia seat, a strict constructionist, someone whose vacancy really compromises the Constitution itself. If Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton appoint his successor, there is no other recourse other than a convention of states.
And we already have 8 states, and what's interesting to me is there's not a lot of media attention. There's not a lot of talk radio. There's a couple of us who press this case. Not a lot of politicians, although that number tends to be growing in terms of national politicians. And so I look at it and say, hell, we already have 8 states. Imagine if we really get behind this effort, right?
Exactly. And what you're going to find is that this is going to be an issue that even before the Texas legislative session begins, I will be advancing across the country. We may see some other states pass it before next January. I do expect Texas to pass it, and we are gaining steam. Remember this. Since I called for the Convention of States, since I was on your show the last time in January, since then, in addition to Louisiana, we've added Indiana, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, and that's on top of states ranging from Florida all the way to Alaska. So, Mark, this is something that people are recognizing, and I think it's kind of like I was, and that is, as a lawyer for a long time, and even as a judge, I didn't understand the necessity of it. But we are living in a different time, a different era, a time when our Constitution has been completely trampled upon, and the good news is we do have recourse in the Constitution itself.
Now, Governor Abbott, you have a few ideas on what you'd like to see, don't you?
I sure do. One is something we've seen occur just this past couple of weeks. Think about this, and that is, under the Constitution, which branch of government is authorized to make laws? We all know that it's Congress, and yet more than 90% of the laws and rules and regulations that govern our lives are never even voted on by Congress. They are issued by agencies that work under the president. Look at the transgender regulation now being imposed by Washington, D.C. Look at the way that Barack Obama amended Obamacare more than a dozen times. Look at the way that Barack Obama had his agencies authorize amnesty for millions of people in this country illegally. That is turning the Constitution on its head. And so what I propose is that no rule or regulation by any administrative agency can become law unless and until it is voted on by the United States Congress.
Mm-hmm. And why is that so radical? You know,
it's not. See, that's the deal, Mark. I think there are so many people in America that they're busy in their lives. They have to work. They have kids to take care of, and others to take care of. And they don't see what you and I have seen, and that is the way in which our government has abandoned the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. You have several other suggestions. What would be your next one?
Well, I think, Mark, as you have written in your book also, if I recall correctly, it's time for term limits. It's time for a balanced budget amendment. We are at $19 trillion in debt. Imagine, if you would, all of your credit cards, all of your bank accounts being fully loaded with you're completely incapable of borrowing anymore. That means you can't spend anymore. That puts a lid on growth. And so those are real challenges. But I'll tell you one that I found, so you'll know, in my role as Attorney General, that is of paramount importance. This is something the founders insisted on as a vital protection in the Constitution, and that is the 10th Amendment. What most Americans don't know, what I point out in my book, Broken But Unbowed, is how the United States Supreme Court itself wrote the 10th Amendment out of the Constitution in a case, the Garcia case, in 1985, and I talk about that in one of my chapters. We have to restore the 10th Amendment in the United States. That's not radical.
Is that where Marshall says something to the effect, well, we know the 10th Amendment's there. That's a statement of fact. So what?
It was Blackmun who wrote the opinion, and Blackmun switched his vote. In 1976, the Supreme Court upheld the 10th Amendment. In 1985, in the Garcia versus San Antonio Metropolitan Transit Authority case, the Supreme Court said it was too complicated for the Supreme Court to apply the 10th Amendment, and they allowed the federal government to dictate how much a state or local government would pay their employees.
And this is why these appointments to the Supreme Court are so important. And, Governor, your point, mine, how absurd is it that one justice can determine what a fundamental right is or what a fundamental right is not, and then there's no recourse whatsoever? Key point right there, Mark, and that is I always ask people, how many votes does it take to amend the Constitution? Now, some people say 2/3 or 3/4. You and I both know it only takes 5 votes of liberal judges on the United States Supreme Court to rewrite the Constitution. And that happens every single year. And we have to take back the Constitution and restore it to the way that it was intended by our founders. In the Federalist Papers, and I point this out in my book, in the Federalist Papers, they say that the Supreme Court and the court system has neither will nor force, only the ability to apply the law. We've seen a Supreme Court hijack all the machinery of the federal government apparatus themselves, with Chief Justice Roberts literally rewriting Obamacare twice to save it. Other judges making up constitutional rights that are found nowhere in the Constitution. Do you think your support for Article 5 in the next 4, 5, 6 years, and I'm going to keep at it, Tom Coburn said, this is his life's mission now. This is my mission. It's one of your missions. You think we're going to make some great progress with this? The answer is yes, and we've seen tremendous progress this year with 4 more states being added this year. And I want to remind your listeners about one thing, about how one person, just one person, can make a difference. And that is, in 1985, there was a student at the University of Texas in Austin who wrote a government paper on an amendment that was passed in 1791 by the very first Congress that was never ratified. And he took it up as his mission to try to get that ratified. And this is before the Internet, before social media, and he wrote letters to one state, to another state. And this was an amendment written by Madison himself that was going to prohibit Congress from being able to vote themselves a pay raise. And on his own, he went to one state and another, and finally he got enough states, he got 38 states to agree, and it became the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution. If one person can do that, I know, Mark, that your listeners can join with you and me, Senator Coburn, and others,
collectively, we have to take back America and ensure that it goes back onto its constitutional pathway. Otherwise, we could lose the United States as we know it.
Because, Governor, even if we elect the greatest man to ever serve President of the United States, this is bigger than one man, isn't it?
Oh, there's no way any one president can solve these problems. There's no way any one lawsuit can solve these problems. That's because the system has been contorted and turned upside down for so long. It's endemic into the way the federal government operates now. But the good news is we don't need to and shouldn't rewrite the Constitution. All we need to do is a couple of minor amendments to, 1, restore the 10th Amendment, 2, prohibit federal agencies from making law, 3, a balanced budget amendment, 4, term limits, some very simple things like that that you and I have both spelled out in our books. And this is going to be easy, simple, direct, not threatening, but it's going to make America, it's going to restore the freedoms that are part of the United States of America.
I have to say, it is. I talk to a lot of people. It is such a pleasure to listen to you, your understanding of this, your desire to move forward with it. You're a governor, you got a full plate, and yet you're saying, you know what, we've got to press this too for the good of the country and so forth. And I'm going to do everything I can. You need me, you let me know, Governor, and it's been a great pleasure. I want my audience, please go out and get Broken but Unbowed, The Fight to Fix a Broken America by Governor Greg Abbott outside of Texas. If you don't know this man, you really got to learn about him as quickly as possible. God bless you, Governor.
God bless you too, Mark. Thanks.
The cure will not come from Washington, D.C. They must come from the states.
I've been there. I've seen it. It stinks. It's about them. It's not about us.
I want Texas to join other states in calling for a convention of states to fix the cracks in our broken Constitution.